So, hi Susanna, thank you so much for joining us for the Rework Women in AI podcast today. So, I wanted just to first ask if you could tell us a bit about the company that you work for, which is Furhat Robotics, and it was founded in 2014, I believe.
Yes, exactly. So we are a social robotics startup from Sweden, originating from the Royal Institute of Technology here in Stockholm. And the company was actually never meant to be a company. So we are the result of the research of our four founders and our current CEO. This was also his PhD project. And it just turned out that the research that they made within social robotics was quite groundbreaking, and people from all over the world started reaching out to the group and saying, okay, where can we buy your robot or your prototype? And then the company was born as a demand out of that. So we've been around for almost 7 years and still based here in Stockholm, Sweden.
And why the name Furhat Robotics? What does that mean and where did it come from?
So Furhat, it is implying the hat, Furhat, as you can see here behind me. And it's a very simple but quite funny reason. So when the founders that I mentioned built their first prototype, which was really hacky, there were cords sticking out all in the back, they were invited to London, to the London Science Museum, to a big exhibition there. And the night before they left, they felt like, oh, our prototype looks really, really ugly. What are we going to do? It's going to be a lot of journalists there. And someone found a fur hat lying around in the office because it was winter in Sweden and really cold. So they covered the prototype with the fur hat and brought it to London. And ever since then, it was remembered as the Furhat robot. So then when eventually the company was founded, they decided to call it Furhat Robotics. So we still call our robots a Furhat robot. So that's the very, very simple explanation to it.
It is a simple explanation, but I wouldn't have guessed it. And for those of our listeners and viewers today for the YouTube edition that we're also doing, that might be a bit less familiar with the terminology of conversational AI and social robotics, can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yep. So typically when we talk about conversational AI, we mean technology that enables conversation between a human and a machine. And that can be speaking conversation, it can be written conversation. Siri in our iPhones is one example of that, Google Home device, or the chatbots that you type with on several websites. That can all be, grouped into the very broad term of conversational AI. And then when we're looking at social robotics, then we are talking about physical robots for social contexts. So they are using the conversational aspects, but it is more than that. It is also a physical embodiment, as you can see here beside me. These are turned off, but these are some of our old robots. So we don't only have the chatbots that are online, but we give it a physical representation that can look in different ways. And we have the conversational aspect included in that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And why do we need them? Why do we need social robots? And what positive impact can they have on business and also just on society at a broader level?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think in many situations in life, we don't need a physical robot. That would just make things more complicated. It's enough to have, Siri in the phone when we're driving in the car or when we're out running, for example. But if you imagine the difference between having your mother read a bedtime story for you over phone or being there physically present, what would you prefer? I think you would prefer the physically present. Or imagine the difference between doing an interview over phone, whereas when you're sitting with the interviewer at the same table and he or she is looking you in the eyes and being in that physical space. So we strongly believe, and there is also some evidence for that, that the physical presence is very important for certain social contexts. But we also know, especially for COVID, that sometimes it's impossible to have a human there for logistical or financial or other reasons, safety reasons. And then we think that a robot can be a very good complement to that. So when the social and physical aspect is very important, but we cannot have humans there we see that these social robots could be a complement.
And what about the challenges that you face with social robotics, and in particular, perhaps the issue of trust? Is that something that kind of comes into your work a lot?
It does. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is that when people who have never interacted with a robot before see, the physical embodiment that looks a bit like a human. It has eyes, it follows you with its gaze. The expectations of what that robot can do is very high. It's almost the same expectations as you would have on a human, compared to if you just see a smart speaker, then you typically understand that there are limitations to what the smart speaker can do. So one of our biggest challenges is for people to understand that technology has only come so far. And even if it's advanced, you cannot just walk up to a robot and say whatever you're thinking about and hope that that robot can return that answer. So that would be one of the challenges that we face. But coming back to your questions of trust, I think we see that in a lot of places in society with new technology coming, that it's increasingly important to understand what happens to my data. Is there a visual recording that is saved somewhere? Is there a speaking recording file that is saved somewhere? What is happening with all this data that this robot could be collecting about me? And that's, of course, up to each and every use case or application to make sure, how do we build that trust into the users? And for different applications, it's different levels of importance, I would say.
And what about the challenge of gender and social robotics?
Yeah, I think we can look at that from different perspectives. Now, I should have turned a robot on here in the background, but one aspect that I think from the gender perspective is to make sure that we have robots where we don't lock the user into designing a specific persona, so that we as platform developers make sure that there are faces that can be male and female and non-binary. There are voices that can be male and female and non-binary. Gestures can be made and differentiated. So that would be one perspective, to allow the user to customize the robot in different ways that isn't locked into certain genders. And related to that is, of course, also to make sure that when we're creating personas for chatbots or for robots, that we really think about, are we confirming any prejudice that is related to this gender, or are we being a bit more open-minded here? So that comes more into the design phase. And lastly, I think one important challenge that we also see as a company is to build diversified teams and make sure that we don't only have a team of programmers and developers and designers here that are, for example, male between 30 and 35 and come from Sweden, because that would give us a very narrow perspective. So I think also in the team that is developing something, we need to make sure to have different perspectives included to make it more interesting and diversified.
And what about the importance of emotionally connecting to machines? Why is that important?
Well, I think it does not apply always that we need to connect emotionally to machines. If I start on that end, I mean, if we think about going to the train station, buying a ticket in the vendor machine, and then running to the train, we don't need an emotional connection there. We just want to get that ticket so that we can run, right? And I think sometimes when we talk about emotional connection, it feels, or it sounds like we need to fall in love with the robots or have very strong feelings towards it. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case. So I think we need to look at what different use cases do we have and what is the purpose of that use case. So if we think about keeping lonely elderly people company, the purpose of such a use case, if we would use a robot in that case, would be to make these elderly feel safe and feel listened to and seen. So in that context, in that specific use case, yes, then the emotional connection becomes very important to create that feeling of safety, which is the entire purpose of the robot being there. And if we look at an interview situation, for example, if we have a robot interviewing people, then the purpose there is to get as honest and transparent answers as possible. So there we need the user to connect emotionally, to feel very open and transparent and honest. So I think in different cases, the emotional connection is very important so that we can reach the purpose or the desired outcome of the thing that we're trying to achieve. Whereas for other use cases, it's not really important. Then it's more transactional, and we just need to get from point A to point B as fast as possible with as few errors as possible. Do you get my point?
Yes.
Do you agree, or?
Yes, it's really interesting to have kind of more of a split between those different areas, because as you said, not every area where social robots will be applied requires the same things. It kind of touches on my next question, which is more looking at where we're heading. Where are we now with emotion AI, and also where can we expect to be in the next 2-3 years, or perhaps even longer term?
Yeah, so I think an important thing to state at first is when we're talking about AI detecting our emotions, it's rather technology that is looking for clues of how we could potentially be feeling. Because just as between humans, it's super difficult to really know what someone else is feeling and thinking. We're only looking for clues if that person looks sad and tired, or jumpy and happy. And it's the same with technology. And we can look at it from three different aspects. One would be the visual aspect, such as if we're smiling, that can be detected by a camera. So typically that means that we're happy. If we're looking, really angry, or our eyebrows are going down, that could be a sign that we're not really happy. If we're turning our attention away, then we're probably not very interested. So the visual aspect is one way of detecting these clues. And secondly, we can look for spoken aspects. So if I speak loud and angry, or if I use certain words that can be filtered or seen as either angry words or happy words, that can also be a clue to how I'm feeling. And lastly, we can have physical measurements, such as measuring the pulse, or sweating of the palms, etc., to see, okay, am I nervous? Am I going up in speed, or am I very relaxed? So these three groups of clues, the visual clues, the spoken clues, and the more physical measurements, are ways that technologies use to detect how we as humans are feeling and our emotions. And over time, I think that these will become more sophisticated, more integrated, to create a fuller picture of how a user is feeling and reacting at a certain point in time, and also connected to a specific individual, so that we can have a better tracking over time. So for example, if you're speaking to a robot, that robot will remember who you are, and also remember that last time you spoke, maybe you were feeling a bit sad and down, or you were angry and you showed signs or clues of anger. And how are you greeted the next time as compared to a person that was maybe showing happy signs the last time they talk? So combining these, making them more sophisticated, adding them to more softwares, and then tracking that over time would be my prediction of how we can see this evolve over the coming years.
That's really useful to have it broken down like that. And kind of moving a bit closer to the heart of this podcast, I guess, looking at women in AI. So what are there, or have there been any challenges that you faced as a woman working within this field?
Well, if I take a step back first, AI for me is a really broad word that can mean so many things. And if I'm just looking at my own company, and also women that I know that are in this field, they can be programmers, they can be founders of a startup, they can be researchers, designers. So it's very broad. And I think these different groups face different kinds of challenges. One thing that's been important for me personally is that I don't have a deep tech background. So initially I felt that, oh, this area is not for me. Artificial intelligence, that feels very advanced, and you probably need to have programmed for 20 years. And then as I went, I realized that, oh, wait a second, this is a new area for everyone. So it means that it should mean that we're starting on an equal level. Of course, there are people that have fantastic experience, but many of us are starting at the same level, and it shouldn't be a difference between men and women. And something that has helped me a lot is to find these different communities, whether it's women in AI, women in tech. There are fantastic communities that help girls how to code, and to find these groups and feel that I'm not alone in this quest. There are others, and we can exchange experiences and knowledge and really help each other on that journey. So that has been the most important for me, to feel that it's not a one-woman race and it's not only one that can succeed. Rather, we need more women in tech and in these new types of technology, and we need to work as a group to get there. At least that's what I think. And how can we become part of these communities and really boost them and have a very positive energy and help each other and recommend each other for speaking slots and all of that. And seeing that movement has made me very, very happy, because that's not something I've seen before.
And I'm not sure what it's like in Sweden, but in the UK, we've definitely seen quite a growth in the number of women in AI, women in data science, women in tech groups emerging, and especially this past 12 months or so, I think, because we've had the opportunity to make them virtual so that they're more accessible and not just perhaps in your own local or a kind of wide area. It can be global as well. So it's great to be able to tap into that expertise and to connect with peers from anywhere now.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. And I think it's the importance, and I'm speaking out of my own experience as well, is just to feel that, okay, this is something that no one has done before and no one knows how to do it. So maybe I'm actually a good candidate for that. What would make me a less good candidate than anyone else? Because if no one has experience of it, yeah, as I said, we should all be equals in that. And now I think it's time for us as women to also demand that opportunity. Because we are all trying something that no one has done before.
Definitely. And for anybody that's looking to get started in AI or to progress their career that perhaps is also coming from a non-technical background, what advice would you give to them for kind of the best first steps for them?
I think finding, this is going to sound so cliche, but if I'm just reflecting on myself, as I said, I don't have a deep technical background, and for me to take the step to become a programmer, that would have been huge and not really something I'm passionate about. Then I would do it only for the sake of saying that, yay, I'm working in AI. So I needed to find an area where my background and my strengths made sense. For me, it was coming from a background as a management consultant and being good in project leadership and mapping processes and seeing the big picture. So finding that strength and also see, okay, which area, AI is so big, what area am I passionate about? And to me, that evolved around the conversational aspects. I'm really interested in communication, both between humans and also humans and machines. So once I have narrowed down both what are my strengths and what do I think is really interesting in my personal capabilities, and what area within new technology do I find is interesting and I could merge the two together, then at least I had narrowed down the different ways to go a little bit. I was lucky enough to work at a company where I could explore the conversational area or conversational AI area a lot. So that was a lucky thing for me. But if you don't have that possibility in your everyday work, I think find some of these communities. Like I said, women in tech, women in AI, there's women in robotics, there's women in voice. Of course, you can join groups where there aren't women either, but these groups I find very good. There's a community called Voice Lunch where they discuss different topics of conversational AI, for example. So try to Google and find these different groups and just, go in there, say who you are, ask for help. And I think the community will provide a lot of help, especially if you've narrowed down a little bit what you're good at and what you're interested in.
Yeah, that's definitely a great place to start, what you're interested in and passionate in, and then digging down a bit more to become an expert in those fields, because like you said, AI is quite broad ranging.
It is, and sometimes I find that these words become a bit of buzzwords, that all of a sudden everyone feels that, yay, I need to work in AI. But first of all, what does that mean? And is that an end goal in itself? Or is there actually something else that you're passionate about? Maybe you're passionate about, I don't know, horseback riding, and you start a barn, but then you realize that, I can automate something. Then I need to deep dive into the new technology. So start with a passion. And I think don't go for AI just for the sake of writing on LinkedIn that you're working in AI, but see, what are you super passionate about, and how can the advancement in technology help you reach that passion. And sometimes that might be through ways that you had never, imagined yourself when you started.
Mm-hmm. And that passion always comes across, and it certainly has today. So thank you so much for taking the time to record the podcast with us today, Susanna. It's been great to learn a bit more about Furhat Robotics. We had the pleasure of learning a bit more about yourselves and the rest of the team at an event that we had on Conversational AI just a couple of months ago. So we'll definitely be keeping up to date with your latest trends and developments and progressions. And we'll also share some links for the website for anybody that wants to learn a bit more about you in the podcast notes below. So thank you again, Susanna. It's been great to chat with you today.
Super. Thank you so much. Take care.